The sun beat down on the metal table until it burned through Caleb's forearms. The heat shimmered off the cracked blacktop, making the whole parking lot look like it was floating. Jonah sat across from him, knees pulled up, biting into a dry burger with too much mustard. They were behind a gas station somewhere in New Mexico. Nowhere special. Just one of those places you stop when there's nothing else. A picnic table rusted at the edges, a faint smell of diesel in the air, and their RV parked nearby in the shade of a broken sign. Caleb didn't talk much. Never had. But Jonah always had questions. About the road, about the past, about what came next. Uncle Caleb, the boy asked, chewing slowly. Where are we going? Caleb stared past the highway. The sky was too big here, too quiet. Just forward, he said, till we don't have to run anymore. Are we running? Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked down at the half-eaten burger in his hand, then back at the boy. Do you see anyone chasing us? Jonah shook his head. Then not yet. They went back to eating in silence, but silence never lasted long in places like this. Out of the corner of his eye, Caleb caught movement. 2 kids, a girl and a boy, maybe 8 and 10. Dust on their clothes. Hesitation in their step. The girl walked closer first. Gray eyes, thin shoulders. Do you have any leftovers? She asked. Her voice was dry, flat, like someone who had learned not to beg, just ask once. Caleb set his burger down, no hesitation, no need to check with Jonah. He slid the rest of the meal across the table. The boy hung back. The girl didn't thank him. She just divided the food quietly, precisely. This wasn't charity. It was survival. Caleb didn't know it. Yet but that moment, one sandwich on a hot metal table, was the start of something neither of them could walk away from. The girl didn't thank him. She just took the burger Caleb offered and broke it in 2. Not straight down the middle, more like muscle memory. She gave the bigger half to the boy behind her without even looking. The boy, maybe 8 years old, took it in both hands like he'd been trained not to waste a crumb. He didn't speak. Neither of them did. Jonah watched from across the table, fries still in his hand. His eyes narrowed, suspicious, not mean, just unsure. The kind of caution that only kids who've lost something too early ever learn. Caleb didn't interrupt. He just sipped from his cup and let the silence settle. The girl sat slowly, legs tucked under her like she was expecting to be told to move any second. She didn't make eye contact, not with Caleb. Not with Jonah, not even with the food. Though, boy ate quickly, not like he was starving, but like he'd learned what happened when you took too long. Caleb studied them. The girl had a cut on her elbow, crusted over but fresh. Her shoes were mismatched. One red, one blue, laces knotted at the ends. The boy's shirt was too big, sleeves rolled up twice. Jonah finally broke the silence. Where are your parents? The question just hung there. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. We're going to our aunt's place, she said, flat, memorized. Where's that? Jonah asked. She shrugged. Far. What's your name? Sky. She motioned to the boy. Micah. Caleb didn't press. He recognized the script. It was the kind of answer you give when telling the truth has cost you too much. Sky wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She didn't look up, didn't act thankful, just cautious, calculated. These were not runaways in the romantic sense, no backpacks full of snacks, no stories about freedom. These were kids who had left because staying was worse. Caleb watched as Sky pushed the last bite toward Micah, who shook his head, full now. She ate it anyway, no waste. He knew that kind of hunger. The quiet kind. The kind that wasn't just about food. Y'all want water? He asked finally. Micah looked at Sky. She hesitated, then nodded once. That was all the invitation they would accept. And maybe, Caleb thought, that was all they needed. Not questions. Not rescue. Just someone who knew enough to ask once and not expect anything back. Sky didn't say much after eating. She sat still, legs drawn close, hands folded over her knees like a folded map, tight, worn, unreadable. Caleb poured water into a paper cup and slid it toward her. She didn't reach for it. He didn't push. Micah had fallen asleep on Jonah's shoulder, and for once, Jonah didn't complain. He just sat there, arms stiff, eyes flicking between Caleb and the girl. Then it happened. Sky looked up. No warning, no build-up. Just her eyes meeting Caleb's for the first time, and it stopped him cold. Because there was something in that gaze he hadn't seen since Mallory. Not the color, not the shape, the stillness. That unspoken, worn thin quiet of someone who's seen too much and learned to survive by staying invisible. Mallory had it near the end, when her body started giving out before her voice did. When she stopped asking for things, stopped, expecting comfort. Caleb hadn't thought of that look in years, but now there it was on this kid. It didn't belong on someone so small. He found himself gripping the table's edge. She looked away a second later. Quick. Almost like it had been. A mistake. Like she hadn't meant to let him see. But he had. And now the question formed. Quiet. Immediate. Unshakable. What happened to you? Caleb didn't ask it. Not out loud. Not yet. Instead, he stood, walked a few steps away, pretended to check something. On the RV. But his thoughts followed her. Mallory once said, "You can tell a lot about someone by how they look when they think nobody's watching." Back then, she'd been talking about her sister, Elisa May, the one who vanished. The one they stopped talking about. Sky looked like that. Not just lost, but unclaimed. And Caleb, who hadn't believed in fate for a long time, felt something shift in his chest. Not a voice. Not a sign, just a pull. Quiet, certain, like some part of him had been waiting for this exact moment, this exact look, to remember what it meant to stay. Caleb didn't speak when he stood. He just nodded toward the door of the diner attached to the gas station. A flickering neon sign above it, stayed open, though it looked like it hadn't been replaced in years. Sky hesitated. So did Micah, still groggy from his nap. But Caleb didn't insist. He simply held the door open and stepped inside. Jonah followed first, then Micah, his small fingers clutching the hem of his sister's shirt. Sky was the last to enter, eyes scanning the empty booths like they were traps. The place smelled like old grease and reheated coffee. A single waitress behind the counter glanced up, bored, then went back to wiping down salt shakers. They chose a corner booth. Sky kept her back to the wall. Micah slid in next to her. Jonah sat across from them, arms crossed, watching everything. Caleb ordered 4 grilled cheeses and waters. No one argued. When the waitress walked away, Jonah finally broke the silence. "Are they staying with us?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He unfolded a napkin, smoothed it with both hands. "They'll stay tonight," he said. "After that, we'll see." Jonah didn't look satisfied with the answer. He glanced at Sky, who stared at the table as if memorizing the scratches on its surface. Micah had his hands in his lap, fidgeting with the sleeves of his oversized shirt. "They don't talk much," Jonah mumbled. "They've had a different kind of road," Caleb said. Jonah looked down. "So did we." The food arrived a few minutes later. 4 plates, 4 identical sandwiches. 4 sets of hands reaching without ceremony. No thanks. No prayer. No conversation. But for the first time that day, they all ate together. And sometimes, that kind of silence, one without fear, is the closest thing to a miracle there is. The sun had dipped low by the time they walked back toward the RV. Caleb didn't say they were coming home. He didn't call it home, not even to himself. It was just a place with a roof and a door that locked, and tonight that was enough. Sky walked slightly behind him, Micah at her side. She kept her eyes on the ground, careful not to step too close, like distance was still her only protection. Jonah trailed a few steps back, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. When they reached the RV, Caleb climbed up first and held the door open. Sky paused as if waiting for someone to change their mind. No one did. She stepped inside. Micah followed, silent. Jonah didn't go in right away. He stood at the steps, watching the two settle near the couch, then looked at Caleb. "They're not staying long, right?" Caleb didn't answer. He just reached past him and locked the door behind them. Inside, the RV was dim but clean. The small table had a chipped mug of pens. The sink was dry. One bunk up top. A couch that folded into another bed. Sky's fingers brushed the fabric of the couch like it might disappear if she touched it too, hard. Micah sat down without speaking and leaned against her shoulder. Caleb watched, not moving. He didn't offer them blankets. He didn't say, "Make yourself comfortable." Because kids like these don't trust comfort. Instead, he turned on the ceiling fan and pulled a bottle of water from the cabinet. "Bathroom's through there," he said, nodding to the back. Neither of them moved, and that was fine. He didn't need them to. Not yet. Sometimes shelter wasn't a roof. It was simply not being asked to explain yourself the moment you walk through a door. And that, for now, was what Caleb could offer. Jonah didn't sleep right away. He lay in his bunk, eyes open, staring at the wooden paneling just above him. Every small creak of the RV sounded louder than usual. Below, he could hear Sky whispering something to Micah, too soft to make out, but steady, reassuring. Jonah turned to face the wall. He had known Caleb for 2 years. That was longer than he'd stayed anywhere else. And for most of that time, it had been just the two of them. Road stops, card games, shared silences. A system. A rhythm. Now that rhythm was off. It wasn't that he hated the two new kids. They hadn't done anything wrong. That was what made it worse. They were quiet, careful, like they knew how to fit into places that didn't want them. Jonah didn't know how to say it, but something inside him ached with the fear that he'd already been replaced. He heard Caleb move near the front of the RV, dishes being stacked. The low hum of the fan. Jonah sat up. "Are they staying?" he asked into the dark. Caleb didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "They're staying tonight?" That wasn't a no. Jonah lay back down. He remembered how Caleb used to check in on him before bed. Tuck in the blankets, sometimes sit and wait until he fell asleep. Tonight, Caleb hadn't come by. He was across the room, with them. Jonah pulled the covers over his head and stared into the fabric. He told himself it was fine. They needed help. He wasn't selfish, but deep down a voice whispered, "If they stay, where do I fit?" Caleb stayed up later than usual. He sat at the small table with the notebook closed in front of him, untouched. The pen rested beside it, but he didn't write. Instead, he watched. The RV was quiet. Jonah was in his bunk, finally still. Micah had curled into a blanket on the couch, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. And Sky? She was lying next to her brother, eyes closed, arms wrapped around herself, but Caleb could tell. She wasn't sleeping. She was holding her breath between every movement, like someone afraid the act of rest might invite something worse. From where he sat, Caleb could see the subtle twitch in her fingers. Not random. Repetitive. A tiny movement. Thumb brushing the edge of her palm over and over. He'd seen that kind of motion before. In veterans. In hospice patients. People who carried pain into their sleep but kept it silent. Then her legs jerked. Just slightly. A wince. A sudden tension in her jaw. Still no sound. Not even in fear did Sky make noise. Caleb didn't move. Didn't speak. He just watched. Not to invade her quiet, but to understand it. A nightmare, clearly. But the kind she'd trained herself not to react to, because reacting might have once led to worse. Sky shifted again, turning her face toward the couch back. One arm came up to shield her eyes. Micah stirred beside her, mumbling something, still half asleep. She stilled instantly. Protective. Instinctive. Caleb finally stood, slow and quiet. and adjusted the curtain over the small window above them. Just enough to block out the rising headlights of a truck passing outside, not enough to disturb her. He returned to the table, sat back down, and this time, opened the notebook. But he didn't write yet. He just looked toward the couch and thought, how many nights has she survived like this, without ever making a sound? The night had settled deep and still. Only the soft hum of the overhead fan and the occasional groan of the RV's frame broke the silence. Caleb stood slowly, careful not to draw attention. He stepped toward the door. Skye remained on the couch, eyes closed again, or still pretending. Micah was pressed into her side, fast asleep. Jonah didn't stir from his bunk. Caleb reached for the lock. It clicked softly, a clean, practiced sound, as the deadbolt slid into place. Not loud enough to startle, but loud enough for Skye to hear. Her shoulders tensed slightly, just for a second. Then, they dropped. Caleb didn't turn to look. He didn't ask if she felt safer. He didn't explain that this RV, this aging shell of metal and wheels, wasn't much, but what happened inside it was under his watch. He just locked the door and left it at that. To most people, it was a basic motion, routine, unimportant. But for Skye, and maybe for Micah too, it was everything, because someone had locked doors against them before. This time, it was for them. And sometimes, the smallest click in the night is louder than a promise. Caleb waited until the RV was fully still. He sat at the tiny table beneath the overhead light, the hum of the fan above barely audible. One by one, the others had drifted into sleep. Jonah in the bunk, Micah curled in a ball on the couch, Skye beside him, wrapped in stillness that looked too practiced. Caleb opened the notebook. It was the same one he used when the silence got too heavy. Notes, observations, warnings to himself. This time he turned to a blank page. He stared at it for a long while before writing the first words. She didn't ask for anything. He paused, then underlined it. Skye had sat at the table, eaten what she was given, accepted water and asked for nothing more. Not comfort, not safety, not even space. And that told him more than 1,000 stories ever could. He continued writing. But she's saying everything. With the way she moves. With the way she looks at exits before she looks at people. Then he wrote one line by itself, the kind of line that sat heavy after it was finished. Don't ask her to trust you. Just be worth trusting. He closed the notebook and placed it face down on the table. For now, that was the only vow Caleb could make. Not to promise anything, just to pay attention. The next morning, the sun was already harsh when Nia arrived. She was one of Caleb's few trusted contacts, a traveling nurse who made her own hours and didn't ask too many questions. She'd helped Jonah once after a fever on the road and hadn't broken Caleb's trust since. Nia stepped into the RV with a duffel bag and warm eyes, taking in the new faces quickly. Skye didn't move from the corner where she sat. Micah peeked from behind her, cautious but curious. Jonah sat nearby, arms crossed, clearly still on the fence about all of it. Just here to make sure everyone's got 10 fingers and 10 toes, Nia said gently, setting down her bag. Caleb gave a small nod. Micah first. Micah was hesitant, but Skye whispered something in his ear, and he nodded. Nia worked with quiet hands, checking his temperature, heartbeat, joints, no resistance. Just a thin layer of wariness. Then came Skye. She didn't speak, didn't resist either. But the moment Nia rolled up the sleeve of her shirt, the silence got heavier. A bruise. Purple, deep, shaped like something intentional. Not an accident, not a fall. Caleb saw it from across the room. Nia didn't say anything at first. She glanced once at Caleb, then looked back to Skye. Hurt anywhere else? She asked softly. Skye didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the wall. Nia didn't press. She finished the checkup quickly, covering the bruise again like she hadn't seen it. But her hands lingered a beat too long. and Caleb noticed. After Nia packed up, she pulled Caleb aside near the sink. "Someone put that mark there," she said under her breath. Caleb nodded once. "No surprise, just confirmation. She won't say who. She doesn't need to," Nia said. "Not yet." Sky hadn't spoken a word the whole time, but her body had told the truth, and now Caleb had no excuse not to listen. That night, the RV was parked near a canyon pull-off far from traffic. No lights, just the hush of desert wind pressing against the windows. Caleb sat near the table again, notebook open but untouched. Sky sat on the floor, her back against the cabinet. Micah had fallen asleep beside her, head in her lap. Her hands moved slowly through his hair, over and over. Jonah pretended to read, though he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Then, without looking up, Sky spoke. Her voice was flat, barely above a whisper, like it wasn't meant for anyone in particular. "There was a place," she said, "with a metal door, no windows, just that door." Caleb looked up but didn't say a word. "You couldn't see anything inside unless they turned the light on. Fluorescent. Buzzed loud." She kept running her fingers through Micah's hair. "There was a drain in the middle of the floor. Like in a kitchen. But nothing ever got cleaned." Jonah closed his book. Sky kept talking. "You couldn't scream in there." "Well, you could. But it didn't matter. The walls were too thick. People outside wouldn't hear you. Even if they were. Just a room away." Caleb stayed completely still. Sky blinked once. Slowly. "One time, Micah had a nosebleed. They locked me in the metal room for an hour. Said I was making too much noise." She looked down at her hands, now resting on Micah's shoulder. "They always said we were lucky, that someone else would have done worse." No one responded. There was nothing to say. The only sound in the RV was the low tick of the cooling engine. Sky leaned her head back against the cabinet. "It was cold in there," she said finally. "Always cold." Then she went quiet again. But no one filled the silence, because the story didn't need more words. It had already said enough. Caleb stepped outside the RV after everyone had gone quiet. The desert night was sharp, dry, and so still it almost rang in his ears. He leaned against the hood of the RV, staring up at a sky full of stars, too many to count, too far to touch, and in that stillness, a memory came back without asking. Mallory. She had been brushing her hair in front of the mirror back when they still had a bathroom with warm lighting and enough space to breathe. Caleb had been sitting on the bed watching her through the reflection. She'd asked, out of nowhere, "Do you think Elisa May's still alive?" He hadn't known what to say. Her sister had vanished when they were teenagers. No police report, no goodbye. Just a trail of rumors and a father who told them to stop asking questions. "I don't know," he'd said. Mallory kept brushing slowly. "I used to think she ran away," she murmured. "Now I think she was thrown away." Caleb had looked at her then, really looked. Mallory's eyes were always full of fight, but that night they were tired. Tired in a way he hadn't noticed until that moment. "If we ever find her," she said, "I won't ask what happened." Caleb nodded. "You'll just, bring her home?" "No," she said, "I'll just let her rest." The memory faded as quickly as it had come, but its weight remained. Sky's voice from earlier still echoed in his head. That metal door, the buzzing lights, the cold. Caleb wondered if Elisa May had once spoken like that, or if no one had, listened long enough for her to even try. He looked back toward the RV, toward the locked door and the dim light still glowing inside. He didn't believe in second chances, but he was starting to believe in unfinished business. And maybe Sky wasn't just someone they found, maybe she was someone sent. Later that night, Caleb sat alone again, notebook open under the weak light above the RV's table. The page from before stared up at him, the one where he'd written about Sky's silence, about how she didn't ask for anything but said everything. He turned to a fresh sheet. This time, there were no descriptions, no observations, just a single question. "Who is Sky?" He stared at the words for a long time. It wasn't the kind of question that asked for a name or an age. It wasn't about paperwork or background checks. It was about the pieces that didn't fit. The way she never looked surprised. The way her eyes scanned every room twice. The way her hands never rested, even when her body did. She wasn't just a scared kid. She was watching everything. Measuring not for danger exactly, but for patterns. For rules. Like someone who'd learned that rules shift depending on who's in charge, and that surviving meant learning them fast. Caleb tapped the pen once against the table. Then, beneath the first question, he wrote, "What was done to her that made silence feel safer than truth?" He closed the notebook not because he was done, but because he didn't want to write what came next. And why does she remind me of people I've already lost? Caleb moved through the small kitchen space of the RV with steady hands. He didn't rush, didn't ask questions, didn't speak. The skillet warmed on the single burner. He cracked eggs, sliced toast, sprinkled salt like he'd done 100 times before. Behind him, the kids were silent. Micah sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing shapes in an old notebook Jonah had given him. Sky leaned against the wall nearby, her eyes half closed. Not asleep, but not alert either. Somewhere between the two. Conserving energy the way animals do when they're not sure they're safe. Jonah watched them both from the couch. Not angry now, just processing. Caleb stirred quietly. The scent of food filled the RV. Simple, clean, familiar. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "Dinner's almost ready." No one answered, but he heard the shift of movement behind him. Micah sat up straighter. Sky opened her eyes fully. He plated the food without flair. Scrambled eggs, toast, a little canned fruit. One plate for each of them. Even Jonah. He set the dishes down on the table without assigning them. They took their places naturally, like they'd done it before. As if routine could anchor them, even if nothing else could. No one said thank you, and Caleb didn't expect them to, because sometimes the only thing that matters is not having to ask. It happened just after noon, in the middle of nowhere. Caleb had pulled the RV into a gravel lot near a rest stop. The kids were inside, windows cracked for air while he refueled and grabbed supplies. He didn't see the man at first, just felt the shift. A silence that was too deliberate. Then came the voice. "Nice rig," the man said, stepping out from behind a truck. Dusty jeans, baseball cap low, a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Caleb didn't answer. The man stepped closer. "I'm looking for my kids," he said, calm. "Girl's name is Sky. Boy's Micah. You seen him?" Caleb's fingers tightened around the gas handle. He didn't blink. "Who's asking?" The man smiled wider. "Name's Travis Beckett. I'm their father." He said it like it was a fact, like it should end the conversation, but it didn't. Caleb let the silence stretch. Measured. Heavy. "You travel alone, Mr. Beckett?" he asked finally. "Usually." Travis looked around casually. "Heard they might have been picked up along the highway. Figured I'd check out here before calling the police." Caleb studied him. There was something too clean about the way he stood. Too practiced about his concern. Like a man who'd rehearsed empathy until it fit. Inside the RV, Caleb knew Sky was watching. Maybe even listening. He didn't need to look, to feel the tension building behind the thin walls. "They with you?" Travis asked, nodding toward the RV. Caleb didn't move. Didn't answer. Travis's smile faltered just slightly. "I just want to make sure they're safe." Caleb finally met his eyes. "They are," he said. And with that, he turned and walked back toward the RV. Slow, deliberate. He didn't slam the door when he entered, but he locked it. Loud enough for Travis to hear. Sky was sitting by the small window when she saw him. She had been watching the horizon, tracing clouds with her eyes, pretending the sky was bigger than her. Fear. But then the figure stepped into view. That walk, that posture, the tilt of the head like he owned whatever ground he stood on. Her body locked up. She didn't gasp, didn't cry. She just froze. Micah sat beside her, playing quietly with a torn shoelace. He didn't notice the change in her right away, but Caleb did. He had just re-entered the RV, closed the door behind him, and turned, only to see Skye staring out the window, completely still, her hands clenched so tight, her knuckles were white. He followed her gaze. Travis Beckett stood outside, lighting a cigarette. Waiting. "Skye?" Caleb said quietly. She didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell too fast, like someone drowning without moving. "Skye," he said again, kneeling beside her. This time she turned her head slowly toward him, and in her eyes, not just fear, recognition, like seeing something that had once controlled her completely and still might. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Micah looked up now. Then he saw him too. "Skye." Micah's voice cracked. Don't let him." Caleb raised, a hand gently signaling the boy to stop. Not because he was wrong, but because Skye didn't need more words right now. He closed the curtain. Skye flinched as it snapped shut. Then she stood. Not to run, not to scream, just to move, like stillness had become unbearable. She walked to the back of the RV, closed the bathroom door, and locked it. A second later, the sound of the sink running masked everything else. But Caleb still heard her breathing, and it was the kind of breathing that came from memory, the kind that didn't start with seeing a face, but never stopped after it. Travis was still there when Caleb stepped back outside. He stood with his back to the wind, cigarette smoldering between two fingers, like he had all the time in the world. Caleb didn't speak right away. He just walked, up and stopped a few feet away. "You make a habit of watching other people's kid?" Caleb asked. Travis smiled, slow and lazy. "Only when they're mine." Caleb folded his arms. "They don't look like they want to be found. They're kids. Kids run away. Doesn't mean they don't belong home." Caleb tilted his head slightly. "Funny thing about home. Usually people don't run from it unless there's something to run from." Travis exhaled a long stream of smoke. "Look, I'm not here to make trouble. I just want to talk to them. That's all." "They're not talking today." Travis let out a low chuckle. "You don't strike me as the legal guardian type." Caleb didn't blink. "I'm not. I'm the man who opened the door when they were hungry and silent. That earns me something." Travis's eyes narrowed. "You think I hurt them?" "Didn't say that. You didn't have to." A pause. Caleb stepped half an inch closer, voice steady. "They came to me without a single request. They didn't ask for food, shelter, kindness. That kind of silence isn't normal, it's learned." Travis shifted his weight. "And you think you're some kind of savior? Just scoop up every broken kid on the highway and play father?" Caleb's voice dropped lower. "I'm not trying to save anyone, I just don't hand kids back to people they flinch from." That hit. Travis's jaw tightened. "I can make things messy for you. Legally." "You're welcome to try," Caleb said. "But if you were sure the law was on your side, you wouldn't be out here talking to me in a parking lot." Another pause. Then Travis tossed the cigarette to the dirt and ground it out with his boot. "I'll be around," he said. Caleb nodded once. "That's what I'm afraid of." Travis walked away without another word. Caleb stood still until he was gone from sight. Only then did he let his shoulders drop. Just a little. And behind him, inside the RV, the curtains didn't move. But he knew every child inside had heard every word. The RV was quiet again. Too quiet. Jonah sat with his headphones on, pretending not to care. Skye hadn't come out of the back room since Travis left. Micah sat alone at the table, legs dangling off the seat. He traced circles into the wood with one finger, over and over, until the rhythm slowed. Caleb was washing dishes. Not because there were many, just because his hands needed something to do. Micah didn't look up when he spoke. "If we make trouble." Caleb stopped rinsing. "Would you send us back?" Caleb turned, towel in hand. Micah still didn't look at him. "Sometimes people keep you," he said softly, "until you stop being easy." It was the kind of sentence no 8-year-old should know how to say. Caleb didn't answer right away. He walked over and crouched beside the table, resting one arm on the edge. Micah finally glanced at him. There was no anger in his eyes, no testing. Just a quiet plea not to be too honest. Caleb didn't offer a speech. No promises. He just nodded once, slow. "I don't keep people because they're easy," he said. "I keep them because they stay." Micah blinked, absorbing, then gave the smallest nod. Not trust, not belief, just a willingness to try. Micah sat still after Caleb's words, hands folded tight in his lap. He didn't nod again, didn't smile, but something in his shoulders shifted, just barely. Like a weight had loosened, not lifted, but moved. Caleb didn't speak further. He just reached out and placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Steady, warm, no pressure. Micah didn't flinch. He simply leaned, not into Caleb, not away, but into the space where someone had chosen to stay without being asked. And that was enough. No promise, no, "You'll be okay," just presence. And sometimes that's the only thing that keeps a kid from breaking in half. Jonah sat outside on the metal step of the RV, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel. Wind stirred dust into slow, lazy spirals, but he didn't seem to notice. He just stared at the ground like it might offer an answer he hadn't figured out yet. Inside the RV, the voices were low. Caleb asking if Micah wanted more food, Sky saying something soft that made the boy laugh. That laugh landed like a stone in Jonah's chest. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. It was displacement. Jonah had been here first. He had learned Caleb's silences, his habits, his soft rules. Never ask twice, never waste food, always stay packed. He had built something with Caleb. Not quite family, but real. Solid. Now it felt like that space was being carved out, filled by someone smaller, someone quieter, someone who didn't have to try so hard to be wanted. He heard the RV door creak. Caleb stepped out, spotted him, and sat nearby, not too close, not touching. They watched the horizon together for a moment. "They're not staying forever," Caleb said. Jonah didn't answer. "Don't need to like it," Caleb added. "Just need to tell me if you stop feeling safe." Jonah's voice was quiet. "It's not about safety." "I know." A long pause. Then Jonah asked, "Would you still have picked me up if they were already there?" Caleb looked at him long and careful. "I didn't pick you up because I had space," he said. "I picked you up because I saw you standing in the middle of the road and not asking for help." Jonah didn't look at him, but his shoulders softened. And for now, that was enough. Caleb found the letter tucked between two paper towels in the cabinet above the sink. It wasn't folded neatly, just creased once, written on the back of an old grocery receipt. The handwriting was small, slanted, like it had been written quickly but with care. No name, no date, just 5 sentences. He read them once, then again. "You don't have to keep us, we can go, just wait until morning. Micah doesn't like walking in the dark. Thank you for the food." That was it. No goodbye, no plea. Just consideration. Caleb stood still for a long time. Letter in hand, the hum of the RV's fan the only sound around him. He didn't show it on his face, his shoulders didn't drop. His breath didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly around the paper. He walked to the couch where Sky and Micah had slept the night before. Empty now. He checked the front seats. No backpacks missing. Shoes still tucked by the door. He opened the back room quietly. They were both there, asleep, curled close together. They hadn't left. Not yet. He stepped back, closed the door, and walked to the table. He unfolded the letter again, smoothed it flat, and slid it into the back pocket of his notebook. He didn't write a response. Didn't wake them up. Didn't say a word. But in the morning, when Sky opened her eyes, she'd find 2 extra blankets, folded at the edge of the couch, and beside them a small note in blocky handwriting that simply said, "Micah shouldn't walk in the dark. Good thing we've got lights." Night settled in quiet layers. Jonah lay in his bunk, eyes open, staring at the roof above him. The others had already gone still. Micah curled beside Sky on the fold-out couch, both of them breathing softly in the dark. Caleb stepped in, closing the door gently behind him. His boots made no sound on the floor. He didn't turn on the light, just crossed the space, slow and quiet, and knelt beside Jonah's bunk. Jonah didn't pretend to sleep. "You awake?" Caleb whispered. A pause. Then a nod. Caleb rested one hand lightly on the edge of the mattress. "You don't have to be okay with this." Jonah didn't answer. "I just need you to know," Caleb said, voice barely above the fan's hum. "Taking care of them doesn't mean I've stopped taking care of you." Jonah swallowed hard. "It kind of feels like it." "I know." A pause. "But it isn't true." Jonah finally turned his head, eyes meeting Caleb's in the low light. "They need you more," he said quietly. "They need someone now," Caleb said. "You've needed someone for a long time. That doesn't cancel out." Jonah blinked. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not losing anything," Caleb said. "The table just got bigger, that's all." He stood slowly, hand brushing Jonah's shoulder once, brief but steady. As he turned to go, Jonah asked, "Do you think they'll stay?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Then, soft and sure, "That's not the question I ask anymore." "What do you ask?" He looked toward the back of the RV where two kids slept soundlessly under borrowed blankets. "I ask what I can give before they have to run again." And with that, he let the silence return. Not as distance, but as trust. Lunch was simple, just sandwiches and some chips eaten in tired silence. Micah devoured his half in minutes. Caleb sat at the table chewing slowly, eyes on the road outside the window. Jonah sat apart, legs pulled up in the reading nook, sandwich untouched in his lap. Sky sat closest to the sink. She'd taken only one triangle of bread and cheese, eating without looking up, but her eyes flicked to Jonah. Quick. Then again. She noticed what others might miss. The way he didn't look at her. The way he held his food like it was a question he hadn't answered. She stood without a word, walked to the table, picked up the untouched half of her sandwich, and walked over to Jonah. She didn't ask, didn't wait, just placed it on the cushion beside him. He looked at it, then at her. She didn't smile, didn't explain. She just nodded once and sat back down. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't dramatic. But in the language both of them knew, where food meant care and silence meant survival, it was loud. And Jonah, after a moment, finally took a bite. No one said thank you. No one had to. The RV had gone quiet again after lunch. Micah was drawing. Sky had curled up with her coat as a pillow. Jonah had climbed back into the bunk, headphones on, not asleep, not fully present. Caleb sat at the table with his notebook open. The last page held the words, "Who is Sky? What was done to her? What am I willing to become in order to undo it?" Now he flipped to a fresh page. The pen hovered, then moved. Today Sky saw Jonah. Not as someone in the way, not as competition. She just saw a boy sitting alone. And she shared her food. He paused, then added, "No speech, no permission, just instinct." Micah doesn't know what that means yet. But Jonah does, and he didn't push it away. Another pause, then slowly, Caleb wrote, "My son shared today. Not because he understood everything, but because something in him knows. This is what staying looks like." He set the pen down, closed the notebook gently, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself the smallest breath of hope. It started as a whisper against the roof, a soft tapping barely louder than the hum of the RV's fan. Micah was the first to notice. He scrambled to the small window and pressed his face to the glass. "Rain!" he shouted, wide-eyed. "It's raining!" Sky looked up from her seat. Caleb stood near the front, turning off the engine. Jonah slid down from the bunk and moved toward the door. Micah tugged it open before anyone could stop him. Rain came in fast. Not a storm, but a clean, soaking desert rain. Big drops, warm from the air, falling hard. Micah ran outside barefoot, laughing. Sky hesitated, then followed, her hair flattened in seconds, her shirt clinging to her arms. But she didn't care. She laughed too. Not loud, but real. Jonah watched, from the steps, unsure, his arms folded. Then Sky looked at him and tilted her head just once. An invitation. He jumped down, landing in a puddle with a splash that soaked his jeans. All three kids yelled at the sky, spinning, feet pounding. The gravel. Inside, Caleb reached for the bucket before the drip could hit the floor. The RV had a leak, probably two, maybe more. He placed a pot under one, a metal bowl under the other. He should have been irritated. But he wasn't. Because outside, his ragtag passengers were dancing in the rain like they'd never seen something fall from the sky that didn't hurt. Sky slipped, fell on her knees, then laughed harder. Micah shouted something about frogs. Jonah tried to catch water in his mouth. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, rain just misting his sleeves. The roof could leak all night, if it had to. He could fix the RV, but this kind of joy, unscripted and soaking wet, he wouldn't interrupt for anything. Later that evening, the rain had passed, leaving behind the thick smell of wet dust and ozone. Inside the RV, one of the small cabin lights above the sink flickered, a stubborn pulse dimming more with each blink. Caleb was rummaging for tools when Micah climbed onto the counter, barefoot and determined. "I can fix it," he said plainly. Caleb paused. "You sure?" Micah nodded. "It's just the wire. Probably loose." He reached up with small fingers, pried the plastic cover off with a butter knife, and squinted into the housing. "Careful," Caleb warned, standing nearby, ready to stop him. But Micah didn't hesitate. He twisted two wires together, wrapped the frayed bit in a scrap of electrical tape he'd pulled from Jonah's drawer, then smacked the side of the panel like he'd done it before. The bulb came back to life. Not bright, but steady. Jonah let out a low whistle. "Who taught you?"
"That?"
Caleb asked. Micah shrugged, but a smile tugged at his lips. "Mama." Sky, sitting across the table, froze. Micah didn't notice. She used to fix stuff in the trailer. Said light's important. Said you don't always need to see far, just enough to keep going. His voice softened near the end. Sky still didn't speak. Caleb reached out and ruffled Micah's hair. "You did good." Micah beamed, then crawled back down and sat cross-legged on the floor like nothing had happened. But something had. In the flicker of that light, Micah had reached back through memory and pulled forward a piece of someone they'd lost. Someone worth remembering, and for the first time, Sky didn't shut the memory out. She just sat with it and let it glow. The light above the sink stayed on, soft, steady, warm in a way nothing factory-made ever intended. Micah had gone back to his drawing.
Sky was helping fold up the towels they'd used to catch the leaks.
Jonah sat nearby, flipping through a worn deck of cards. It was an ordinary moment. And that was what undid Caleb. He stood near the door, one hand resting on the frame, watching them move. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with something close to ease, like they had found a rhythm, like they'd started to believe they weren't temporary. A sound caught in his throat. He turned away fast, stepping outside before anyone noticed. The air was sharp with the smell of wet pavement. Stars blinked through thinning clouds above. He gripped the edge of the RV's metal siding, shoulders tight. He didn't sob, didn't shake. Just stood there, eyes wet, jaw clenched, like a dam holding back years of grief, guilt, and whatever this strange new feeling was. Not sadness, not quite joy. Something more dangerous. Hope. Inside, laughter flickered. Micah teasing Sky about her terrible folding. Caleb wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. He wasn't ready to let them see that part of him yet. But he was getting closer. The stars were sharp above the desert. Caleb sat alone on the step of the RV, the cool metal biting through his jeans. The others were inside, voices soft, distant. He let the night wrap around him like an old coat, and then the memory came, uninvited, but clear. Mallory, her voice, was always calm when it mattered most, even when her hands trembled, even when the doctor said the word unfair, and no one in the room corrected him. They were lying in bed, her head on his chest, the oxygen machine hissing in rhythm. She traced slow circles on his arm as if trying to memorize it by touch. "Promise me something," she'd said. Caleb didn't answer. He already knew he'd break any promise she asked for, but she said it anyway. "If I'm not here, you live. Not just breathe. Not just go to work and come home tired, I mean really live." He'd looked at the ceiling then, jaw tight. She turned her head up, eyes locking with his. "Live like you've got the part of me that didn't get to finish." He shook his head, voice rough. "Don't talk like that." "I have to." A pause. Then, quieter. "You carry me, Caleb. But don't let me weigh you down." He hadn't known what to say. He still didn't. Now, sitting under the same stars she used to name like old friends, Caleb felt the familiar ache stir behind his ribs. But something had shifted. He looked back at the RV, a patchwork home filled with silence, repair, and soft beginnings. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't carrying Mallory like a stone anymore. Maybe he was learning to carry her like a compass. Jonah sat on the edge of the couch, hair still damp from the earlier rain. The others had gone quiet for the night. Micah curled in his blanket. Sky pretended to read, but her eyes hadn't moved from the same page in 10 minutes. Caleb rummaged through a plastic bin by the back wall and pulled out an old, soft shirt. Faded green cotton, worn thin at the collar. Mallory's shirt. He walked over to Jonah and held it out. Jonah looked at it, then up at him. "Can I ask something?" he said, voice low. Caleb nodded. Jonah hesitated. "Do you think people can start over?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He knelt beside Jonah, unfolded the shirt, and gently began drying the boy's hair. No sermon. No, yes or no. Just careful. Hands wringing water from strands like they mattered. Jonah closed his eyes. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, like something loved and tucked away, now brought back for use, instead of memory. Caleb worked in silence, then draped the shirt over Jonah's shoulders like a shield. He didn't say, "Of course you can." He didn't have to, because the act had already answered the question. The envelope was thin. No return address, just Caleb's name, typed in block letters. He didn't open it right away. It sat on the dashboard of the RV for hours, while the kids napped while he changed the oil, while Jonah helped Micah wash a handful of pebbles they'd collected like treasures. But now the sun had gone down, and the others were asleep. Caleb sat at the small table under the flickering light and opened the envelope with steady hands. One page, 2 names. Elisa May Carter, confirmed maternal match. Mallory Carter, deceased, confirmed first-degree relative of Elisa May, which meant one thing. Sky wasn't just another runaway. She was Mallory's niece. Mallory's blood. Caleb sat back slowly, letting the weight of that settle into his chest. Elisa May. The sister Mallory had mourned in silence. The girl no one in her family had wanted to talk about. The one Mallory had once called the part of me they tried to erase. Sky was her daughter, which made her family. Caleb looked toward the back room where Sky lay sleeping, curled tight around her brother. She didn't know yet. Or maybe she did, in the way that children sometimes know things no one tells them. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But something inside him locked into place. This wasn't just kindness anymore, or duty. This was a chance, not to rewrite, the past. But to pick up the thread someone else had dropped, he folded the letter carefully, slipped it into the back of his notebook, and said out loud softly, to no one in particular, she found her way back. The next morning, Caleb laid the opened DNA letter on the table. Skye stood nearby, arms at her sides, Micah behind her like a shadow. Jonah watched from the steps, chewing the edge of his thumb. Quiet. Caleb didn't make a speech. He simply tapped the page once with his finger. Elisa May was your mother. Skye didn't move, didn't blink. Caleb added, that makes Mallory your aunt, which makes you... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Skye's eyes dropped to the paper. Just words, numbers, names. I already knew, she said, so quietly it barely left her throat. Micah didn't seem surprised either, just confused about what came next. Jonah looked at Caleb. You okay? Caleb nodded, then looked at Skye. I knew before the test, he said calmly, not with proof, just somewhere in my gut. The way you sit with silence, the way you protect him first. Skye didn't cry. She didn't smile, but she stepped forward, picked up the letter, folded it once, and kept it. Caleb watched her walk, back toward her bed, not as someone who had gained something, but as someone who'd just had something they'd always carried finally named. And no one said anything more because it didn't change who they were. It just explained why it already mattered. It happened faster than anyone expected. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up just before noon, not with sirens, not with force, but with quiet purpose. Dust curled around its tires as it stopped beside the RV. Caleb stepped outside, calm but alert. 2 officers got out. One of them, Deputy Morales, gave a small nod. We're here for Travis Beckett. Caleb didn't have to ask why. Morales continued. He violated an existing restraining order, came within 50 feet of a minor protected by the court, and, he checked his notes, another woman filed a separate report. Similar pattern, same description. It all stuck. Caleb didn't smile, but something in his jaw loosened. I assume he didn't go quietly? Morales smirked. Tried to. Claimed he didn't know the order applied here, but we've got the paperwork, and now, he's not walking out. Skye stood in the doorway behind Caleb, barely visible. Her eyes locked onto Morales' badge. She didn't ask questions. She didn't move. She just listened. The second officer nodded toward the back seat of the cruiser. Through the tinted glass, a shape shifted. Slumped, handcuffed. Travis. Caleb didn't look at him. Morales added, quieter this time. He won't get out quickly. Not this time. Someone else finally talked. And we listened. Caleb nodded. Appreciate the follow-through. Morales tipped his hat. You gave us something to follow. With that, the officers returned to their vehicle. The cruiser pulled away, slow over the gravel. Inside the RV, Skye turned from the door and sat down next to Micah. No celebration, no cheer. But her hands didn't shake this time. Micah leaned his head on her shoulder, and for the first time in days, Caleb allowed himself a breath that didn't carry weight. Justice hadn't fixed everything, but it had finally arrived. Micah had been quiet all morning, not withdrawn, just focused. He sat cross-legged on the RV floor, colored pencils scattered around him like sun rays. His tongue poked out in concentration as he moved the pencil carefully across the page. No one disturbed him. Skye watched from the couch. Caleb glanced now and then, but said nothing. Even Jonah, curious, stayed back. It took him an hour to finish when he stood up. He held the paper out to Caleb without a word. Caleb took it and stared. The drawing was simple. 5 figures, stick style but full of personality, standing in front of a boxy RV. The sun shone behind them, too big for the page. Each person was labeled in Micah's uneven handwriting. Micah, Skye, Jonah, Caleb, Mallory. Caleb blinked. You never met Mallory, he said softly. Micah shrugged. Doesn't mean she's not here. Sky looked down, her throat tight. Jonah crossed his arms but didn't turn away. At the bottom of the page, in thick crayon, Micah had written, "We don't wait to be picked anymore." Caleb looked at him. "What does that mean?" Micah's voice was steady. "It means we picked us. No hesitation, no need for permission." Caleb felt something settle in his chest. Not heavy, not painful. Just true. He nodded once, then walked to the small wall above the sink, found a clip, and pinned the drawing in place, right where everyone could see it. And no one said a word, because the picture had already said enough. The RV was quiet again, evening light spilling gold. Across the floor, Caleb sat at the table, the notebook open in front of him, pages filled with fragments, observations, questions, silent prayers he'd never admit to writing. Tucked inside was a smaller slip of paper, worn from being unfolded too many times, a note from Mallory. Not long, just a line she'd scribbled, one night on the back of a grocery list and tucked into his coat before her last hospital stay. He unfolded it now. "Let the faded ink breathe. Family isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to stay." She hadn't meant it as instruction, just truth. Back then, he hadn't understood it. Now, watching the outlines of 3 sleeping kids and one boy pretending not to need tucking in, he did. He folded the note carefully and placed it back in the notebook. He didn't need the words anymore, but he kept them, not as a reminder, as a confirmation. Mallory was gone, but her compass still pointed home, and somehow, this mess of an RV with its patches and leaky roof and too many shoes by the door was exactly that. The diner looked exactly the same. Same sun-faded awning, same buzzing neon open sign, same cracked corner booth by the window where Caleb had first sat with Jonah, sweating through a burger in the dry heat of New Mexico. But this time, they didn't walk in hungry. They walked in together. Micah ran ahead, grabbing menus like a host. Sky followed behind, calm but alert. Jonah lingered by the jukebox, thumbing through dusty song cards. Caleb held the door with one hand, tipping his cap to the waitress, who did a slight double take at the new crowd. They slid into the booth as if it belonged to them. It did now. The waitress came over, recognizing Caleb. "Back again, huh?" He nodded. Thought it was time. Sky ordered pancakes, extra syrup. Jonah asked for fries and for breakfast, just because he could. Micah demanded chocolate milk, twice. No one asked what was next. No one looked over their shoulder. There were still questions in the air, about school, paperwork, long-term plans, but none of them mattered right here, right now. Jonah leaned into Caleb's side, not for comfort, just for presence. Sky laughed at something Micah said with his mouth full. Caleb let himself smile without guilt for the first time in what felt like years. Outside the window, the sky was clear. The same road that once meant escape now felt like choice. The waitress placed the plates down, messy, steaming, full of flavor and no finesse. It was perfect. Caleb lifted his coffee. "To making it back," he said quietly. No one toasted, but they all dug in. And for the length of that breakfast, there was no grief, no law, no memory chasing them from behind, only the sound of forks on plates, and the quiet miracle of having a table full again. She couldn't have been more than 6, hair tangled, one shoe missing. She stood outside the diner window, just far enough back to not seem like she was asking, but close enough that it was clear she was hoping. Sky saw her first. She didn't speak, just stared at the girl for a few seconds. Fork paused mid-air. Caleb noticed the shift in her posture. He followed her gaze, then looked back at his plate, still half full. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, toast with jam. Sky turned to him. "She's hungry," she said. Caleb didn't stop her. She stood up, grabbed her plate, and walked outside without hesitation. Micah looked confused, but didn't speak. Jonah watched her go, Then, after a second, grabbed his untouched hash browns and followed. They crouched in front of the girl, said something too quiet to hear. She didn't smile, but she didn't run either. Sky handed over her plate. Jonah added his without a word. The girl took them both like someone used to having to choose, and surprised to find she didn't have to this time. They didn't stay long. Just enough to make sure she had food. Just enough to leave her with something warm in her hands. When they came back in, Sky sat down silently. Jonah did too. Caleb looked at them. You didn't ask. Sky shook her head. Didn't need to, Jonah added. We knew what you'd say. Micah leaned in. What would he say? Jonah grinned a little. He'd say, don't waste food. They all laughed. Soft, easy. Caleb smiled, not because of the joke, but because of what didn't need explaining anymore. The afternoon, sun had softened by the time they stepped out of the diner. No longer harsh, no longer burning, just warm. Steady. The kind of light that didn't demand attention. It simply stayed. Caleb stood for a moment on the sidewalk, one hand resting lightly on the hood of the RV. The kids were a few steps ahead, bickering about seat positions and whether chocolate milk counted as hydration. He didn't interrupt them. He just watched. Sky walked with more weight in her steps now. Not heaviness, but presence. Like she knew she belonged somewhere and didn't have to earn it every hour. Micah skipped over a crack in the pavement, talking fast and without filter. Jonah lagged behind, earbuds in, but not pressed too tight. Still listening, just not too obviously. Caleb closed his eyes for a beat, face tilted toward the light. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It wasn't redemption. It was something quieter, rarer. Peace. Not because everything had been fixed, but because he wasn't running anymore. From grief. From guilt. From the silence Mallory left behind. He had stayed, and in staying somehow he had built something worth returning to. The sun caught his face as he opened his eyes. And for once, Caleb didn't brace for what came next. He was already in it. They were getting ready to leave when the manager of the diner, a wiry man with tired eyes and a voice like gravel, stepped out from behind the counter. He called out to Caleb. You're the one from last month, he said, with the boy, sat in that corner booth. Caleb nodded. The man jerked his chin toward the table. Those two kids, the girl and the boy, they with you now? They are. The man rubbed the back of his neck, then looked toward the window where Sky and Micah waited by the RV. My niece saw what your kids did today, giving up their food like that. Caleb didn't reply. He didn't need to. She asked me why no one had ever done that for her, the man added quietly. I didn't have an answer. He paused, then reached into his apron and pulled out a folded brown bag. Give this to them. Caleb opened it later, in the driver's seat, once they were back on the road. Inside, 2 wrapped sandwiches. Still warm, no receipt, no label, not leftovers. A gift. Sky looked over from the passenger seat and Micah leaned forward between them. Who gave that? Caleb didn't answer at first. Then he smiled. Someone who saw what sharing looks like. When it's not about pity, Micah opened the bag and broke one sandwich in half. No one asked him to. He handed one piece to Sky, another to Jonah, and Sky, before taking a bite, looked out the window, at the diner now disappearing behind them, and whispered, almost to herself, We don't wait to be chosen anymore, Jonah added. We're not leftovers either. Caleb didn't speak. But as the RV rolled on, a quiet certainty settled over them. The circle had closed, not as a return to where they'd been, but as proof that what began in hunger had become something whole. Night had settled in again, not heavy, not ominous, just quiet. The RV hummed on low power. The kids were asleep, sprawled in soft patterns of comfort. Micah half on top of a blanket, Jonah curled in his corner, Sky with one hand still gripping a pencil mid-doodle. Caleb sat at the small table, the same notebook open under dim yellow light. He flipped past pages, past old doubts, unanswered questions, sketches of grief. He stopped at the back, where there was still space, and he wrote, slow, deliberate. We are not rich in space. We are not rich in time. We are not rich in answers. He paused, glanced toward the sleeping kids, then continued. But every day there is enough for one more plate, one more voice at the table, one more chance to give instead of guard. The pen hovered. Then, with finality, none of us have much, but somehow there is always enough to share. He closed the notebook, exhaled, didn't smile, didn't cry, just let the stillness hold him. Like arms he didn't need to see to believe in. Tomorrow the road would continue, but tonight they were enough.